Chapter 4: How to explain ADHD to your child. For every parent with a youngster who has been diagnosed as ADHD, one of the most difficult tasks is explaining ADHD to the child. Most parents fear saying the wrong thing, which could leave their child with the notion that he is defective or incapable of controlling his behavior. Others feared their explanation would frighten the child, becoming an excuse for misbehavior or a self fulfilling prophecy. To avoid anticipated pitfalls, some parents dodge the dilemma altogether. Others cloud the issue with yarns about little vitamin like pills that must be taken twice a day to make a child big and strong. Avoidance seems an easy answer to in the short run, but such shortcuts eventually hit roadblocks. For example, when a youngster continues to experience problems in school and elsewhere, consider 6-year-old Jonathan. He knew something was wrong with him. His name was always on the board. He was the last one chosen for teams, and no one ever invited him to play anymore. It was hard for him to finish his work at school, so he frequently missed recess. Board work was the worst. He tried, but he couldn't keep his mind on his work. Frustrated and bewildered, he felt his self confidence plummet. You should explain ADHD to your child. You should tell him you realize it is difficult for him to sit still, stifle interruptions, keep his mind on a job, or control his impulses. Otherwise, your child may conclude he is dumb or bad, as Jonathan did. Absent discussion, you and your child remain on opposite sides of the struggle. Inevitably, a child needs to understand ADHD. There is no one time or right way to tell your youngster about ADHD, but there are some guidelines about which we feel quite strongly. Our years of experience working with children and their families have taught us several principles about discussing serious matters with children. Keep it simple and honest. Motivate your child to cope. Validate your child's understanding. Let's look at each of these 3 points to see how you can make them work for your family. Keep it simple and honest. Whatever explanation you elect to use, your interpretation should adhere to the facts about ADHD. Talk to your child as his level of understanding. Consider his personality and tolerance for information. Does he prefer a lot of details or just a few brief facts? Is she easily frightened by discussions that relate to body function? Since there are many ways to approach the task, it is unlikely any truthful explanation will be wrong. A couple of examples will make this point. Cal was 7. He had never sat at the table for an entire meal. Many evenings, however, both parents repeatedly tried to get Cal to sit in his chair. Invariably, completely worn down, they would finally allow him to leave as everyone else continued eating the main course. After one of these unpleasant dinners, Dad found Cal later that night playing with his collection of little cars. He suggested they have a little talk. Cal, you know, it's very difficult for you to sit at a table, isn't it? I bet it feels like we're always fussing at you. But, son, I want to have dinner with you. I want to hear about your day. Mom and I realize you do have more trouble sitting still. It's also harder for you to go to sleep at night. We want to help you learn to sit a little longer at the table so we can get to dessert together. Jemmy had a different sort of problem. Jemmy is a bright 10-year-old who came home crying because his classmates called him hyper and teased him about talking hyper pills. Rather than avoiding the facts one more time, Jemmy's mom decided to give an explanation a try. On this occasion, his mother asked Jemmy what he thought hyper meant. Jemmy answered, crazy wild. This gave her the openings she needed. Immediately, his mom began correcting his misinformation. First, she assured Jemmy he was neither crazy nor wild. In fact, she said, you are a very bright boy. But sometimes it takes you longer to do your work, but not because you don't know the right answers, but because it's difficult for you to keep your mind on your work. Both Cal's dad and Jemmy's mom used simple words to describe what they noticed about their child's behavior and to acknowledge that sitting still and focusing attention were difficult for these youngsters. The descriptions were simple and honest because they meshed with the facts as everyone knew them. Your explanation should motivate your child to cope. Your explanation should provide a stepping off point for your family to work together to manage the effects of ADHD. Besides providing a basic definition, you are trying to interpret ADHD so that your child is motivated to cope with and even overcome the symptoms. The rest of Jemmy's story makes this point well, agreeing that he found it hard to concentrate on his work. Jemmy explained, but that doesn't explain why they call me hyper. Continuing, his mother explained that hyper was an abbreviation for a word he had heard before, hyperactive, which means always moving and unable to sit still for long. Jemmy instantly recognized that this did not describe him at all. Other kids at school take medication for hyperactivity, but not me, he told her. Jemmy's mom then asked him what he thought his problems were. With only a brief hesitation, Jemmy said that his real problems were daydreaming and being interested in all the stuff going on around him, so that his teacher was always annoyed with him for not completing his work. As a result, he would get frustrated and sometimes angry if his classmates teased him about how slow he is. His mom was actually a little surprised by her son's astute understanding of his problems. She confirmed his conclusions that his real problems related to concentration and being overly sensitive to the comments of peers. Third, validate your child's understanding of ADHD. With our previous suggestions in mind, Jemmy's mother took the discussion one step further. She did not ask him what he understood about ADHD, but questioned what kind of things were difficult for him. She asked him about other things he did outside the classroom, about which the kids might tease him. With a little prodding, she turned Jemmy's focus to the playground. Why are you often picked near the last four teams? He offered the fact that it was hard for him to keep his mind, much less his eyes on the ball. She told him how that too fit the pattern of ADHD. Jemmy's mom asked him what he could do if his classmates needled him again. Together, they came up with some retorts he could use. During these conversations, Jemmy gained some accurate information he could apply in several ways. He learned there were different forms of ADHD and that he could manage his problems better. Armed with a few comebacks, Jemmy was ready for the next time when a peer called him hyper. I am not hyperactive, I just have a distractibility problem, and the pills help me concentrate better. A few days later, he told his mom he was really surprised that the other students said very little. Whether they were stunned by his sudden confidence or simply not prepared to pursue the issue further, they felt they left him alone for a little while. As Jemmy repeated this explanation to other students and found them more accepting, he gradually shared other bits of information with his friends. I can't talk or even look up when you say something to me in class. I have to stay on track. I have to stay on track. I will talk to you later on at the playground. In a curious way, this explanation became less an excuse for Jemmy and more of an inspiration. His classmates learned not to bother him in class, and he was motivated to pull himself away from the distractions that remained. There are many explanations you can use with your youngster. Just remember to keep them simple and be honest. Look that helps your child cope with the problems associated with it. In the following sections, we will furnish some approaches that have worked for other parents. Among them, you may find an explanation that you can tailor to your child. The younger the child, the more elementary the explanation needs to be. Children do not want a lot of extraneous information. They prefer to know only what they need to know to understand the situation. Do not feel pressured to tell your child everything you know about ADHD. He cannot digest all of the details in one setting. Over the years, you will have many opportunities to add to his store of information. As a general rule, avoid diagnostic labels. More important than a name are some simple facts that make sense to your child. It is helpful to introduce the vocabulary that explains the symptoms: attention, distractibility, impulsiveness, etc. Make the explanation one that helps your child relate to the symptoms he has. Most youngsters love imaginative stories told with a little showbiz razzmatazz. We often use animal characterizations and analogies to get our point across. Few 6-year-olds have observed animals in the jungle, but they instantly relate to the concept of a tiger in their tank. To demonstrate the rambunctiousness they feel, to Cal, the 6-year-old who could not sit at a table long enough to complete his meal, his dad suggested there was a tiger in his tank they needed to tame together. Pleased with this notion, Cal exclaimed, "Yeah, I'll get him to be still. I'll stand on his tail." Rather than feeling guilty about his restlessness, Cal was motivated to work with his dad toward a reasonable goal. With a child who is particularly interested in mechanical objects, an example of a runaway freight train and a supercharged motor that only he can bring under control might work equally well as a tiger. The parent of a 5-year-old who was mesmerized by trains first read her by child the story of the little engine who could by Piper Vetty. Then she suggested that sometimes her young son became so wound up he was like a runaway train barreling out of control around the house. Perhaps, she suggested, Like the little engine, they too could put their hands together and work on self control. I think I can became the family motto. From robots to volcanoes to superheroes with extraordinary powers, any topic that focuses on channeling energy suggests a good working explanation. It all depends on the child's age and interest and what you can seize upon to hold his attention. The same approach will work to explain concentration and impulse control to the young child. Our favorite description is the deer in the forest who hears a noise in the woods. From storybooks and movies, Jonathan, the child who felt so bad about his ability to complete his work, knew that a deer looks towards a sound freezing in place until he discovers whether the source is friend or foe. Since Jonathan had seen the Walt Disney film Bambi, he knew that the little rabbit was rather impulsive and frequently failed to wait long enough to identify the source of a sound, so he didn't get into trouble. Using Jonathan's comments, his mom explained, "You are only good at hearing sounds, but sometimes you don't know which ones are important to listen to. So, you listen for everything. If your teacher gives you directions, you hear them. But when she talks to another group of children, you listen to those instructions, then to children talking behind you, to a yell in the hall, and to truck going down the street outside the school." Using your child's comments, you can easily adapt your characterizations to explain the concepts of selective attention, knowing what to pay attention to, and sustaining attention, which is maintaining attention long enough to complete a task. Jonathan's mother suggested, "I'd like to help you work on learning what to listen to and what to ignore so you can finish your work. Relate your explanation to your child's typical symptoms. Once you have developed a working concept, the next step is to use illustrations from your child's life to generalize the explanation. For instance, perhaps you have talked about how impetuous the little rabbit in Bambi is to explain the notion of impulsivity. You have been working on teaching your child how to cross the street. He knows he must stop, look both ways, and wait long enough to be sure it is safe to cross. What would happen if a ball ran into the street and he darted after it without
Is he
pausing?
as aware that pausing and waiting to gather the necessary information is important in less dangerous situations also? Would it also be true for attending to parents' instructions long enough to find out what the family is going to do next, or listening to the teacher's directions to find out how to do an assignment the right way? With each of these examples, the little rabbit may be a helpful example to illuminate the concept so your child recognizes the importance of trying to attend better. Provide as much information as the older child wants. By third grade, most ADHD children are experiencing significant strains. No matter how well they are coping, the child needs to grasp the nature of his problems, but usually also seeks some knowledge about why he is having these particular difficulties. Now it is appropriate to begin to reveal how attentional processes work, since this is the source of much of his difficulty. Initiate a discussion of individual differences. Upper elementary school students are aware of who is good at what. If you ask your child who is the best reader in his class, who is good at math, who is considerate of other people's feelings, who runs the fastest, he can tell you. With little difficulty, your child will accept the idea that some children are good at particular skills while other youngsters have different talents. This basic understanding of individual differences also applies to attentional abilities. Extend the discussion to yourself. Children are fascinated with the idea that one of their parents is also better at concentrating than the other. Perhaps mom can read the novel while the television squawks in the background and the family members are talking. But maybe that would not work at all for dad. He must enter his study and close the door where he wants to concentrate. The concept of filters provides an uncomplicated but satisfying reason for this difference. Mom simply has better filters in her mind. She can block the extraneous noise that comes her way to continue reading. On the other hand, dad's filters may not be as strong. That is not his fault. It happens to be a It happens to be the way he is, but it does put more of a strain on him, so he is not able to attend as long without getting tired. If other family members illustrate your point more effectively, use them instead. Ultimately, the ADHD child knows that we are talking about him and that the reason he has difficulty concentrating are similar. The illustration in figure will help you describe how the brain acts like a computer. Like the computer, it receives input, but unlike a computer, the brain is constantly bombarded with information assembled through many different means, including sight, hearing, smell, touch, taste. Simultaneously, there are messages coming to the brain from within the body, including feelings of fullness or hunger, hot or cold, thirst, fatigue or energy, and comfort or pain. Finally, there is information from inside the brain, old memories, worries, or preoccupation with things that are happening today and even fears and hopes about future events that competes for attention. This is quite a lot of input for any brain to sort out and control. Constructively explain explain that some brains handle this fairly well, but for some people the thoughts occur so rapidly, the impulses are so bold, and the feelings so sensitive that they overwhelm the filters of the control center. The control center does not intend all the extraneous stuff to get through, but sometimes this occurs nonetheless. Once so much access information enters, the control center gets confused and does not know what to focus on any longer. Every stimulus starts jockeying for recognition. First, the control center recognizes the hunger in the stomach, the pants that do not feel right, and then a thought about what is for dinner. Similar to a TV set that is continually switching channels, a person with this problem has a hard time getting a sense of what's going on or what is relevant. In the child's case, he becomes so busy reacting to stimuli that he may be attending to the wrong things when pertinent directions are given and may not recognize which information is important at the moment. As he struggles to sort out the incoming information, his impulses compete for recognition also. Sometimes they are so strong that they override or completely avoid the censoring mechanism that is supposed to prevent ideas from crystallizing before they escape into words or actions. A similar interpretation can be employed to explain why many ADHD children are perpetual motion machines. The child's body is in constant motion because the impulses are radiating without any deterrence. From the control center, with nothing to impede in his impulses, a child can easily be out of his seat by the window, touching a pencil and running his hands over the wallpaper without thinking twice but about it. As we suggested, in the case of a younger child, explanations must be presented in a manner that motivates a child to cope and strive to overcome the problems. Yes, he has more trouble filtering out stimuli, but now that he is aware of this difficulty, he can offer some assistance to his control center. In chapter 7 through 13, you will learn how to help him do just that. With teenagers, de emphasize the differences. Explaining anything to a teenager is a way that will not turn him off his the biggest challenge of all. Double that for the ADHD teen. First, you must remember that adolescents cannot tolerate anything that makes them the at least bit different. Hair, clothes, friends. A pimple is as big a problem as a bad test grade. Wearing glasses or anything else that sets them apart is a major disaster. Second, teenager resist any solution to a problem suggested by a parent. As a rule, just getting on the same wavelength as your adolescent is a major accomplishment. With this in mind, how then do you explain ADHD in a manner that engenders understanding and cooperation? If you have been dealing with this issue for a while, your explanations have evolved through the years. If you have avoided the topic or have just discovered the problem, you may have to pursue this goal silently more gently. Respect the adolescent. Talk to your adolescent one on one as you would to another adult. Honesty is crucial. So do not attempt to hide anything. Acknowledge there is a problem, then pinpoint its characteristics. You have trouble paying attention long enough to complete your homework in a single sitting. It is not just because the work is boring, you have a naturally short attention span, so you will have to work around it. You are easily distracted by things going on around you. In the classroom, this makes it hard for you to concentrate on what a teacher is saying. Your mind tends to wander off the subject. Sometimes, although you do not mean to, your impulsiveness gets you put into difficult situations. Provide resources to corroborate and expand the information. Most teenagers want to know why this is happening to them. Sometimes it is best to let them hear a formal explanation from an unrelated person whom the child knows and respects. It might be his physician or therapist. Other teens may prefer to read about the problem. You might start with this book or select a few resources from Appendix B. If there is local support group for children with ADHD, your son or daughter may find it helpful to discuss these issues and exchange information in a group. Occasionally, parents are able to link their adolescents with an older college student who has successfully coped up with these problems, who then become a model for your younger child. One 14-year-old who was extremely reluctant to discuss any aspect of ADHD came away from a meeting with a senior football star who also happened to have attentional problems with a new view of situation. Probably no amount of information from a parent or a professional could have changed this in youngsters' attitude as quickly. Join with your teenager in developing solutions to old problems. Once you have broken through the barrier to talking about ADHD, your teen will be more receptive to information. The computer control example is still valid and a good starting point for discussion. Most teenagers want access only to the information they need today. Long before you explained ADHD, they knew they had difficulties. If you are lucky, they may accept help now. When you begin to discuss the attentional problems that plague your child, you may be met by a sigh of relief. This means you are on the right track. If your son finds it impossible to listen to your lecture classes and is always getting in trouble for not listening, then knowing this may provide an impetus to give it a new try. Being able to say to himself and maybe even to a friend or two that he is having problem concentrating in history classes and needs to sit in the front of is a big step. Adolescents need a strong relation, rational to be brave enough to verbalize the difficulty, sometimes the explanation and label provided. After identifying your teen's particular set of problems, let him see this book, point out the chapters that are relevant, discuss how you might work on each aspect of the problem in a new way together. Validate your child, validate your adolescent's feelings and fears. Remember how you felt when your physician or psychologist told you your child was ADHD. No matter how sophisticated we get when we hear a diagnosis about our child, it is emotionally draining. It takes time to comprehend the significance of the information and sometimes to accept its meaning. Your adolescent is in the same position. He will have some questions now and more later. Sometimes those questions will turn into denial. Other times, his fear will affect his outlook. The emotions will jumble and you will not be able to predict his response. Stick with it. Be there for him, and eventually you will reach some understanding that allows you both to cope with more effectively with ADHD.